What am I doing? I'm talking to an empty telephone.
I don't understand.
Because there was a dead man on the other end of this fucking line.
100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now playing The Terminator, 12 Angry Men, Citizen Kane. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop ever until you are dead. Welcome to Corona Cinema. I'm Liam Waite, and I'm joined as always by Ross.
Good evening.
Matty.
Good afternoon.
And Mason.
Hello, you alright?
Great, now I have to go back and edit that. Could have just done it flawlessly, but he has to take 10 seconds to unmute himself. The Terminator from 1984. A human soldier is sent from 2029 to 1984 to stop an almost indestructible cyborg killing machine sent from the same year, which has been programmed to execute a young woman whose unborn son is the key to humanity's future salvation. Directed by James Cameron, who co-wrote the screenplay with Gail Ann Hurd, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, and Michael Biehn. No Oscar nominations for this film, despite the many nominations for the sequel. Whoever picked this, go.
So yeah, this was my film, and then going into this week, I had only ever seen all of the other Terminator films apart from this one, which is quite a weird way to do it. I assumed always that the second one would have been the best, and the first one would have been just kind of like the dodgy one that kind of half had the ideas formed and not been very well executed and then built on. But actually, I think it's like completely the other way around watching it. And it was nice seeing Arnold play this character that he's really, really famous for. But I've only ever seen him in the points where later on in the films that he's been reprogrammed to be a nice, lovable guy. So to see him play someone who is actually the Terminator, that someone who is this unyielding, it was actually really good to see. And the film's quite dark as well, quite like horrific. Like it could be seen as like a kid's film, like da 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 da, like the Terminator. But it kind of like really picks up and like lays a tone and the way he just basically executes people, and it keeps cutting across these whole like scenes of just an absolutely destroyed room, and then people's bodies have just been just absolutely like decimated. So I really liked the direction they took this film in, and considering how like early on it was, I think you can see why it's like such a staple. And the storyline's a little bit it's kind of like interesting to approach time travel in this way, considering some of the other like Back to the Future films around that time kind of approach it in a much more fun and kind of like flames and fire and kind of like different way, a much more childish way to approach it. And this takes in a much more serious kind of like tactical military approach to it. And basically people coming from the future, they're just hard and roughed up, and people just bred into survival. So people like Kyle Reese, really, it's interesting to see how he psychologically fits into kind of a climate that is like that predates the war, and the kind of like the idea that everyone thinks time travel isn't possible. And if you think about it, if time travel is possible, it doesn't make sense that you wouldn't believe it. It wouldn't work just because it doesn't happen now, because it would happen in the future, if that makes any sense. So it has to be possible now. But it's just interesting how they see these people like reject that concept over and over again, and he's just seen as like a mad person, which is what would happen essentially. So he had quite a nice arc, and there's parts of the film that all kind of like tied together nicely. Some of the bits like where like you see the photo being taken, it edges on the like the photo that's of her that Carl Reese had when he was growing up. He's like edges on the little bit of like, not being corny, but like a bit like it's a bit forced kind of thing to like, but it kind of like ties the loop on the story and makes everything kind of not make sense, but like goes, oh okay, that's that not make sense, but like I don't know, it fits together well. So it might feel a bit forced in those areas, but the special effects for that time as well works absolutely like fantastically. It really like drove the industry in that respect. The stop-start animation towards the end, when the Terminator actually gets out of his kind of like biological skin, that kind of gets a bit ropey, but it kind of had to be done for the time. So I think the film's more or less flawless, and I wouldn't really change a thing about it. And I know a lot of people like question like Arnold's casting in it, and casting films. Well, people just don't like him in general and say he can't act because it was like thick Austrian accent. But I just think he just makes the film, and he's just one of the most iconic characters. I think in all of cinema. So I just really enjoyed the film, and I just can't believe I hadn't seen it up until now.
It's funny that you say that you'd seen like all the sequels before seeing the original, because I feel like I look like most people who didn't see it at the time kind of have that same experience. Like I watched the original first because I hadn't been watching movies before 2017, so it's kind of like I gotta watch the original, then I watched the second one. I haven't seen any of the other sequels, but I think for a lot of people post that era, it's like, yeah, you saw the second one because that was the big, like one of the biggest kind of blockbusters of all time in terms of like a big summer blockbuster taking over that whole period of that year. But it's discovering how, because even though I watched the original first, it still had the reputation, like the second one had the bigger reputation as kind of like doing all the stuff the first one wanted to do, but scaled up with a lot more money. But discovering how good the original was actually really cool. And even though maybe I prefer the sequel a bit, just because it's a bit more pulsating. I think this is a really nicely directed film. It takes its time. It's quite patient, which I kind of appreciate. It's what I wasn't expecting from a Terminator film. Like there's quite a long build up between like setting up like the first basically the whole build up to the tech noir scene, the club scene, which is an iconic scene, 6 scene. That whole build up takes quite a while. Like it's probably like 45 minutes before you actually get there and the Terminator is actually attacking the Sarah Connor. So I thought it was an interesting approach it took to going about it. Ross, what was your relationship to this franchise? Have you seen the sequels before watching the original like Matty, or was this the first time you'd watched any of these films?
So this was my first time watching any of them. I think a lot of people, I've seen clips and I know that I'll be back, that kind of stuff. Like I figure most people know that kind of thing. But in terms of actually watching the whole film, this is the first time I watched any Terminator film. And I was quite impressed. I think they do really well. Like it's directed so well because there's a lot to explain with the guy coming back and having to explain to Sarah Connor what's going on and why he's there and stuff. They do really well at fitting in that like exposition, but doing it within car chases and doing it within them being together and stuff. And so it keeps the pace of the film, because you could quite easily drag the film down and slow the film down by not having that, say like they do in Tenet. But because they do that, it keeps the pace of the film. But I think what it is, it's a simple enough idea, just about a robot from the future trying to kill a lady to stop her son being born. But because of the action, the pace and everything, it makes such an interesting watch. And like, yeah, for a film in the 80s with like a 6 million budget, the graphics are unreal, especially like the future sequences for such a small budget and in their time periods, unreal visuals. And yeah, the Terminator himself, like, although the stop motion might be now a bit iffy, it had to be there to kind of set stone for future films that have like, I feel like the 80s was a time where graphics that's when they really started to get better and better. Say like the Star Wars films or Back to the Future and that kind of stuff, it's where they start to get better, and this kind of sets stone for that. So there's kind of no problem with that being there, and it doesn't, although it is kind of, you do notice it now, them kind of being, you really know it's stop motion, but it doesn't take you out of the film at all. But yeah, it's, as I say, a simple idea, a simple plot, but played out really nicely and really well paced, and action throughout, and it's very intense and it always keeps you interested, and I think that's why it's so good.
I think the strength of it is not having to do a lot of exposition, because it's so well crafted. Like the kind of visual storytelling is so perfect, like from the outset, kind of setting up, okay, who's the hero, who's the villain, who's the victim in this story. What's going on here? Oh, so he's targeting people called Sarah Connor through the phone book, and like it sets all that out without doing anything tedious or like you say, kind of everything's just very neat. I think in this film, I also think there should be more like there should have been like a phone book killer slasher film in like the 80s. Phone books seem a complete myth now. The idea that you just have all your details in this book for people to access, but like I feel like when they were around in the 80s, I feel like there should have been another movie like this where it's just a guy who just randomly just goes through the phone book and starts killing Matty Westcotts. So yeah, let's go back, set a film in the 80s, and we can do that. I also think, kind of talking again about the idea of knowing the second film before knowing about the first film, and that the difference in reputation. I think it kind of had the inverse effect for me, because where people who watched the first film then watched the second one in cinemas, they were like, oh my days, they managed to take him. He was the villain in the first one, now he's the hero in the second one. And it kind of had the inverse effect for me, because I was like, oh, because I knew he was like the franchise was kind of built around him as the hero. So then to watch this for the first time and he's the villain was kind of shocking. And even like there's not many films where the villain is the star. It's like Schwarzenegger's the guy you're coming to see when you're watching this film. And it's kind of I can't think of another example, like not including like anti-heroes, like an actual example of the villain being the main draw for a film. Mason, do you think that was something that was quite interesting? Was this the first time you watched the film? Was that something that was intriguing?
Yeah, I'm the same as Ross. I've not seen any of the Terminator films before, but in my head, like I knew enough about the franchise where he is a good guy. So I was watching this, I was like, what the fuck? Like, this feels more like, I mean, I haven't seen the second one, but I feel like this film should have come basically like after the second one as like an origin story for why he, like where he kind of come from and why he was evil previously and stuff like that. That's what it felt like to me watching it. So I guess I need to watch the others to kind of see the difference. But yeah, like my normal perspective of the film was that he was a good guy. So at the end, I was kind of waiting for it. I was like, oh, shame, he's going to like discover emotion, you know, and like realize that he shouldn't be killing this person. But when it didn't happen, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to go watch the second film. But yeah, it is quite strange that, like you said, having the villain as the biggest draw to a film, but that's still been effective for like the viewer and the people who actually want to go see it. And I don't know if that's just because of Arnold Schwarzenegger being cast as the main person for it, or if it's just the film itself and everything about it that made it so appealing to have this kind of like unique take to put him like in the center as a villain.
May kind of alluded to the idea that people don't rate him as an actor, or kind of like dismissive of him as a performer. I think, like, I don't know who those people are, but I think he's got a very unique skill as an actor. Like, obviously, I can't imagine he's not going to go do, I don't know, Marriage Story or something. Like, it's not that kind of skill set. But in the same way, in a different way, like he's not like The Rock. Like, I don't think The Rock's a good actor, and I don't think he's even got like a kind of an action presence, like a leading man kind of presence. He's just kind of big, and that's like the draw, and that's like fair enough. Some of his films are quite entertaining. I think Arnold brings something different. There's something more, like, I don't know, there's something more than just being an imposing guy. He's got something more about it. And I think part of it helps is, like Matty touched on as well, like the accent. Like, he just has like an irresistible need to try and imitate everything that he says. Like when he's picking out the guns in the store, and he's like, give me a 9mm, all that kind of stuff. Like, everything he says, you kind of want to imitate it the whole way through. That's kind of a unique thing for anyone. Matty, what is it about Arnold Schwarzenegger as an actor that you find engaging, something that makes him kind of stand out and not just be, because other people kind of just like, yeah, he's just big in it, he's just a bodybuilder who they put on screen, but I think he's more than that.
I'm not sure if there's anything he does. I think the fact that he just does it anyway in spite of people, and it might not be necessarily that he definitely doesn't have the background in acting that the majority of actors would, but I think it kind of like it symbolizes that era of when villains changed from being these slight villains and heroes changed from these being these like slight kind of like generic kind of like normal looking people, probably like your average looking baseball player kind of thing, and then changed into these monstrous men that were just massive and shredded. And around the 80s era where you get like Sylvester Stallone and then like playing Rambo, and you get Arnold Schwarzenegger and all these different characters that come through, and it's kind of like that change in what the perception of kind of like strength and like being a hero or being someone of power is. in cinema. And whether you like that or not, you can't deny that like the golden era of bodybuilding was like a hugely influential part of that and cinema. And then the guy himself, I don't know too much about how he is personally, like behind the camera. Behind the camera? Yeah, because he's not in front of it. But he's just lovable. And the way he just does things. He had his own little quirk to things. He definitely added his own little quirk to this character, which could have been completely menacing, but then somehow worked when it's twisted to be that fun kind of friend that's also like completely selfless and like protective and loyal to a fault. So it kind of just works. It works really well to this role, and then he's replicated that across many films. I think Twins with Danny DeVito is another one of my favorites. When they're both non-identical twins, because Arnold Schwarzenegger took everything that's good, and Danny DeVito took everything that's bad. And then you just watch these two characters kind of navigate life. And again, like other characters can't really do what he does. So yeah.
Playing a robot is hard as well, I think. It's not just simple, just turn up and do a bit of a stodgy voice. I think it comes across more in the second one. If you watch that, for reasons you'll find out if you watch it, but like he has to actually change how he acts as a robot throughout that film for reasons. I think it comes across better in that one. But another thing that I thought was interesting, watching it, I watched it for the second time about a month ago, and then I watched it again this weekend. But the second time I watched it was like kind of the influence of Halloween, having seen Halloween since seeing the Terminator for the first time. That kind of idea of this indestructible villain walking around town, taking people out, that kind of, and the kind of vibe of Halloween. I kind of felt that, and then looking at like Wikipedia afterwards, like what's his name? Just forgotten his name. How about I just forgotten his name? Cameron. What's his first name? James. Fucking hell. What just happened? See, I never used to get this when I was a few years younger. Now I find I just like have random like memory blackouts for things like that. James Cameron. James Cameron was a fan of John Carpenter, who did Halloween. So that kind of style, I felt that watching it on the second time, and then even more so watching it for this third time with that like actually in my mind that he was influenced by that. Mason, did you think when did we watch Halloween? Was that Halloween time? So like 4 months ago or something like that? Who did that on the podcast? Did you feel that kind of vibe emanating at all in this film?
It's just that atmosphere that they have, that the villain that it creates. I feel like in both these films, we talked about in Halloween, like he doesn't run, he just walks, and for some reason that's just even more terrifying. Like even in Terminator, he's even when he's like just this killing machine, he's like fast in the way he reacts, but he's still slow at walking over to things and stuff like that. And obviously that like promotes that he is obviously this robot and stuff, but when you're watching it, it is just that even that bit more like terrifying, because you're like, oh my days. Like, and I think Arnold Schwarzenegger does give a good robot impression, because especially like a robot that's pretending to be a human at the same time, I think like it's just wearing like a human mask basically. But yeah, comparing like both of the films, I really like it. I really like that kind of style of just slowness and just building up fear continuously by doing really simplistic things, I think. And I think what both films do effectively is that it's kind of like very human, but kind of a bit off at the same time, you know, like I said, like the way they walk and stuff like that, the way they react, it's unsettling because they look human, but equally they're not. So I think, yeah, for the viewer, and especially for me, it works so well having that thing that's just putting you off just that little bit as you're watching it. The
only thing I don't like about the film, and I feel like I haven't seen anyone else with this opinion, but I don't really like Michael Bihn's performance, who's Kyle Reese. Like the like intensity that he puts in is kind of the point, and that's like what he was asked to do. But I don't know, it just never does it for me. I just find it just comes across as really bad. Like comes across like he's trying too hard. I don't know. There's always something about it that just doesn't work for me. Also, the sex scene in this film is really bad as well. It felt really awkwardly inserted. Awkwardly inserted with the soppy music and like the slow-mo on the hands. It's really weird that it just like kind of fades to black and then straight away they go back to the action. It's really weird. It's like 30 seconds. It just comes, completely changes the mood, then comes back out again. A lot of innuendos. Yeah. So the sex scene didn't work. Don't know what they're doing. Also, Sarah Connor's 18 in this film, which that sounds really weird when you think about it like that. Ratings, Matty.
I gave this an 8.6.
Mason,
I'll give it an 8.7.
Ross.
Yeah, I'll go with an 8.6 as well.
Wow, I wasn't expecting to be that high. 8.3. Next film, 12 Angry Men, 1957. A jury holdout attempts to prevent a miscarriage of justice by forcing his colleagues to reconsider the evidence. Directed by Sidney Lumet and written by Reginald Rose, starring these 12 angry men in order of juror number: Martin Balsam, John Fielder, Lee J. Cobb, E.G. Marshall, Jack Klugman, Edward Binns, Jack Warden, Henry Fonda, Joseph Sweeney, Ed Begley, George Voskovec, and Robert Webber. Is nominated for Best Picture, Director, and Screenplay. Didn't win any of those. So if I pick this, you can now speak about it.
I mean, it's hard what to say about this film because I think it's just so good. Like, I watched it for the first time, I think 2 nights ago or something like that. You can just tell that it's just like one of the elites. Like, it's just so smartly written. And I think I honestly, it's so weird. Like, I've never really watched a film like this where everything worked for me as I was watching it. There was no point where I was like, oh, come on, that's a bit like, just allow it. But for a film that's like under 1 hour 40, I really enjoyed it. I think it's really, like I said, it's really smart. It's really effective. I like the idea that we're almost like the 13th man on the jury, where we learn all of these things that the jury have picked up individually as the film goes on. So when the film starts, we were obviously only introduced to the guy who apparently killed his dad. You see like a shot of him once in the whole film, and it's about like 5 seconds long when you see his face. And it's really effective because you see that you're kind of introduced to the like potential killer. You're like, okay. And then you go into the jury room with them, and then you kind of learn more about the case. And as you start the film, you're like the majority of the jury, you believe that he is guilty. And it's just such a weird experience as the viewer because straight away I was like, yeah, obviously he's guilty. Like the information that the film presents us with straight away, you're like, yeah, cool. It's pretty simple. And then it seems like the impossible task of Henry Fonda to make everyone believe that he could potentially be innocent. And what I really like is how that as we're introduced to each of the jury members, we like learn a specific thing about them that will help us kind of understand later on why they believe that he is guilty. Like you have people's like prejudice, you have this guy's like relationship with his son, stuff like that. And I think it's just mad. Like when you're watching it, it's just so weird how you yourself as the viewer flip quite quickly. Henry Fonda like convinces us pretty quickly as he convinces people in the room as well that this guy could potentially not have done it. And when you have a film that is set just in one room, I think you really then see the skills of like the directing, the camera angles, and the actors themselves. I think they really have to shine through because you don't have any like special effects. You don't have any big sort of scenes or anything like that. It's all just in one room, and then it's up to everyone else to kind of build it up and make the most of it. And it's kind of like I watched One Night in Miami the other week, and these films that are just set in one room, I don't know, I think like they're just so effective in what they do as long as they're executed well. Like if you have a bunch of bad actors in this kind of setting, it would just completely fail. But when you have something that's so smartly written with such great actors, it's just, yeah, I think it creates a masterpiece, and I can see why this film has a 100% rating. So yeah, I'd like to see people say much wrong with this film.
I like how hot it is in the room as well, and the way they convey that straight away. Just like people constantly like dabbing their heads to get rid of the sweat. You have that one ill guy who makes me feel so uncomfortable. Like, but why is he there? Like nowadays, post-COVID world, he wouldn't be in there. Like, nah, mate, go home. Just spluttering into his hanky, and they're constantly like squirming, like because they always get up when they want like to make a point as that certain times because they like just feel like they're just squirming in their seats. It's all sweaty, like the jeans or their trousers sticking to their leg, and it like fits the idea of like throwing all these like it's like broad spectrum of different kind of personalities within America, putting into this like melting pot of this room and watching them go, and kind of injecting all these different ideas, like Mason said, like the ideas of like racism, prejudice, and ageism, and all that kind of stuff, throwing it all into this one room, and then having that all play out with just conversations between these 12 guys. But it's just, yeah, it's mad what they're able to accomplish here. I find it interesting that like you still wouldn't expect it to be, what is it, 4th on IMDb or 5th? It's in the top 5, I think. Yeah, 5th. Like you still wouldn't, even though it's like it's clearly really good and interesting, you wouldn't think, because IMDb, that's that's where the popular movies are, like Infinity War and Endgame. I think they're both in the top 20, and I think Dark Knight's in the top 10 as well somewhere. Like I don't think you would expect this film to be so high. Like Ross, what do you think? What do you think makes people enjoy this so much? Like, there's such a broad range of people who just watch popular movies, they still get a kick out of this.
I think it really does still hold up to this day, and I think that's the key. Like, obviously, minus it being in black and white and the kind of technology in that day and stuff, it still holds up to this day. And the fact that when you watch it, you're still so intrigued by everything that everyone is saying, and like you get to know, you feel like you're part of that jury, and it's incredible when a film can do that and pull it off. Not many writers, directors can do that, and I think along with that, 12 good performances, especially from Henry Fonda and E.J. Cobb, 2 great performances there, among the 10 other guys who are great as well. You feel like you're in that hot, sweaty room with everyone. You just feel like you're there with them. And it's very special that when a film can do that. And I think that's why people love it. And this is the first time I saw it, and I loved it. And it was great. Like, and as Mason said, like you get to know kind of a little bit about each person as you go on. It's just like one of the greatest screenplays probably ever written as well. And yeah, there's nothing bad you can really say about it. I can't think of anything bad to say about it, and that's why it's still so highly regarded to this day. Yeah,
I feel like this film was more like hopeful than I perceive it to be. Like, I feel like this was going to be like a triumph of the legal system, kind of these men debating this situation and getting to the kind of right answer. But for me, it's kind of felt like, I don't know what you guys thought, but like it made the death penalty look so stupid, and the fact that the death penalty still exists in several, maybe more than several in like states in America. I don't know how many places it is there, but it's how just absurd it is that like these bunch of guys who like desperate to go to like a baseball game in the evening or whatever other reasons these people wanted to get out of that room, just like it's just hot, I just can't be asked, I want to go home. The idea that they can like decide whether this kid like dies or not, just like watching it just kind of felt ridiculous. That was the situation, and that's still like a thing that kind of goes on. Like they, to the point where they don't even know each other's names, they kind of just walk out of that building at the end. They have that one exchange where he's like, oh, what's your name? And then they go back into the world and probably maybe never see each other again. And the idea that they almost put a kid to like sentence the kid to death just seemed kind of mad to me. Matt, is that something that you felt watching? I think you've seen this a few times. Is that something you felt like, the idea that this made the death penalty look really silly, this film, I thought?
It is kind of baffling how much like power they could exercise over one person. They've not really even met him, really. They've just seen them being displayed in court a few times. And yeah, it's just kind of daunting that they could do that. Things I did like about the film is that how the exposition wasn't done in a way that was unbelievable or felt like, oh, this is exposition, because everything is laid out very legally and methodically, so that everyone understands in the room, so you understand exactly what's going on, because everything has to be set out factually. So I really like that about the film, how when they sit down, they explain how it's going to work, what they're going to talk about, and then before they argue about something that was already previously talked about, they re-explain it to everyone in the room just so they know what they're talking about. So I think everything happened in a really, really nice way. And the fact that they got 12 different characters to all display different views realistically and give everyone their own, like, you can still like almost remember every character in that without even knowing their names. You can remember the way they acted and like conflicted with other people, the way they kind of backed each other and didn't, and all the views that they had and the way they interacted with the case. And you can see how all different things that were pertinent at that time and still possibly pertinent now kind of came into like classism and kind of even parts of like racism as well, kind of like knitted their way into like the leanings of it and the biases of everyone on this jury. And I like how they've also not edged, but kind of leaned on the side of just simplicity with just the use of one room. And they could have easily tried to add in other scenes and tried to see like a resolution of the case, or tried to see people outside, or maybe even tried to like display bits of the court hearing, but they just kept it to that room and kept it to the hour and a half, and it just works beautifully well. And you can just see this film in every kind of aspect, even though like all these characters like they're based on people such a long time ago, it's just aged really well. You know, you can tell that it's like based in like the 50s or 60s or whenever it's based, but you can just see it's still just so pertinent, so kind of like not necessarily relatable, but like true. And you don't say, "Oh, that's dated. That wouldn't happen now." But you see certain things you wouldn't say, certain things wouldn't be said so outwardly. But even like the things about classism are challenged in the room, or where he's having to go at one of the dudes for not originally being from the States. You can see how these things are still pertinent now. I just think it's a really well balanced script. And just really well acted all around. And there's no part of it you would say that's too much or that's not enough. And it kind of feels like a bit of like a psychological experiment, locking 12 people in a room and getting to argue about something that's almost not mundane. Like the thing is very important, but then they go into such mundane details. And you kind of like yourself, you get engrossed in whether the kid did it or not. And that's supposedly not even really the point of the film. It's just kind of like how one person kind of, it's interesting. What I found is interesting how like one person kind of counteracted the view of 11 other people just because he wasn't sure, and that's kind of seen as a good and idyllic thing because he wasn't sure and he wanted to like do this right. But then when it gets to the other end of the film, and then you've got one person who thinks he's guilty against 12 people who aren't sure and think he's not guilty, he's then made to feel bad for holding out on his decision. But it's just because he's making the decision for the wrong reasons. But he's almost looked down upon because he's exercising his right, even though that right comes from a place of almost bigotry and not letting go. So it's just kind of interesting, thought-provoking things that make you probably try and analyze parts of the film. But yeah, strongest film I've seen in a while. I saw it a long time ago and I'm glad I watched it again, and it just still holds up.
Yeah, and with Henry Fonda's character, obviously, yeah, he has to show the courage to stand up for his ideas. Like you say, like it's not even that he thinks he's not guilty, he's just unsure and he wants to prompt a debate. But I like that when he calls for the secret ballot and it has like a shot of his face, and it's kind of like the look on his face is like his like faith in humanity is on the line in this moment. If they all just say nah, he's still guilty, because obviously he says if they all vote guilty, then he'll abstain. So it's kind of in that moment, it's like, right, if they still all vote guilty, I don't even know how I'm gonna proceed knowing I was a part of this, like sentencing a kid who might have been not guilty to the death penalty. I also like we've talked about with the prejudices, how it kind of shows how those people are like valued members within this within the case and within the discussion of the case, and then brought like out of that, like valued members of society, in the way that like they have the thing with the slum kid, and he does that thing with the switchblade where he shows them how you can hold it, kind of thing. It's like, yeah, he basically have knowledge. He has knowledge that he's able to bring to the table that's really important in this case, as like and then it's just like a metaphor of how they're like important within society in a wider way. And in the same way, like the old man, like the old man is kind of looked down upon, and they kind of try to dismiss his opinion. Like he's able to like empathize with the old man who's the witness, the one who he's trying to say like he just wants a bit of attention. Like he's probably quite lonely, so that's the only reason he's saying that he heard. Was his evidence? But he heard the kid saying, "I'm going to stab you" or something like that. So I think that was his like bit of testimony. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting way to kind of frame it. And also, Matt kind of touched on it, like the kind of themes that are still resonant today. I thought the biggest one for me was like kind of like the tribalism in terms of like sticking to your side, and regardless of the evidence that's put forward, you just stay to your side. So you're not really interested in engaging with the facts. You're just kind of like, okay, I'm this. I think he's not guilty because you can present any argument to me and I'm still going to stick to that side. I thought that was the kind of interesting way to put it. Mainly that the guy who's sneezing into his hanky, he's the biggest gammon in the group, and he's he kind of he's emblematic of that kind of idea of no, he's not guilty. And then he even says, one of his quotes is, "I'm sick of facts. You can twist them any way you want." Like, he's not interested in engaging in an argument. He just has his own bigoted view of the situation. He's not interested in what you've got to say. He's going to stay to that. That's kind of like a lot of people in this like populist age of politics in this country and in America as well. So what is kind of a interesting thing, Mason, was that something that you thought was kind of a interesting idea that was resident in the 50s when this film was made and is still happening today?
I think that's what makes this film so much more effective, and I guess why I enjoy it so much as well. It's because, like you said, a film from the 50s is still so clear today. Like, this film doesn't feel dated, like Ross said, although it's black and white. If it was in color, the characters themselves and what they represent is so clear of what today is. And when you watch this film, you can look at all 12 people on that table and be like, yeah, I know someone who is exactly every person on this table. But from the 50s, you'd expect a few of them to be dated, definitely. But like you said, you have there's a couple gammons on the table who they're very like, it's just mad to watch, like you said, in 2021. And these people are like everyone that I see on like Facebook and stuff like that. Like, it's so mad. And then you look, like you said, you look at these people that they have the ability to send someone to like the electric chair in America. And like some states in America still have this. So you're telling me that these people, basically, like this scenario that we watch in this film, can happen pretty much daily, you know? And it's just mad that system is still in place and these people still exist, to where we can find ourselves in the exact same situation as like this film. And it's a bit long, really. Like, I feel like they can make a sequel and it'd be the exact same script. So maybe they should.
Forgot to mention that amazing scene when he's kind of like just rambling, just being a dick, being a racist, being a whatever a bigot in any kind of way, and he's standing up rambling, and they all kind of one by one stand up and turn their back to him, and it's kind of like a nice way to show like, yeah, rather than engage with these people, just literally turn your back, and that will pacify him. That's one of the more iconic scenes, I think, in the film. Okay, shall we get some ratings? We'll start with Mason.
I think it's, like I said, I think it's a solid film. There's not really much to change about it. So I gave it a 9.1.
Matty?
I gave it a 9.
Ross?
Yeah, I also gave it a 9.1.
I'm going to give it an 8.8. So those are our ratings. Looked on Letterboxd yesterday, saw Leonie gave it 3 stars out of 5. Ross, do you want to invite her in to briefly explain herself? Because 3 stars out of 5, that's kind of like, just a bit average.
I'm not going to invite her in because she's in the shower, but no, I didn't understand why she did that, and I was like, really? I think she has an agenda against old films. That's why. She's like, oh, I've seen it so many times. It's like, yeah, but this was the first one. They set the stone. This is how it started. But I don't know. I felt I couldn't be bothered to like go into it. I was like, it wasn't worth it. Like, yeah, you can probably imagine.
And while Ross ends that relationship, we'll move on to Citizen Kane from 1941. Following the death of publishing tycoon Charles Foster Kane, reporters scrambled to uncover the meaning of his final utterance, Rosebud. Directed by Orson Welles, who supposedly co-wrote the screenplay with Herman J. Mankiewicz, which is a topic explored in part in David Fincher's Mank from last December. Starring Welles, Joseph Cotton, Dorothy Comingore, Ruth Warwick, and Everett Sloane. It's nominated for 9 Oscars, including Best Picture, Director, and Actor, but it only won Best Original Screenplay, which, again, controversial for who wrote the film. This would be Ross's film. So
I remember you said when we picked this, you said this film's a vibe, and it is. It's just a vibe. Like every scene is different from the last in this film, and yeah, it's just so interesting because you're watching a man with so much money do whatever the fuck he wants with it. Like, what can he do? He's like, I'm just gonna buy a newspaper and do that. Like, that's what he decides to do. And it's like, yeah, it's cool just watching his life play out. And like straight off, you got this really cool like news report scene it goes on for quite a while, but it's not like, it doesn't feel long. It's all about the life of this mad man. It goes over his whole life. Like, he's rich, he has his own palace. It was so interesting straight away. And yeah, it grabs your attention straight away. And you just want to find out about this man, how it all happens. Like, what does Rosebud mean? We won't mention how no one was actually in the room when he said Rosebud, though. We just won't talk about that. But yeah, I think even anyway, like, I enjoyed watching the film, kind of his life more, rather than these reporters go around trying to find out what Rosebud meant. I enjoyed just watching his life play out more than that anyway. But yeah, it's just such a great, interesting story about the life of a man who had millions and did whatever the fuck he wanted with it, and found greatness and just ended up dying all the miserable anyway. I think that's very much like the moral of the story. And yeah, you've invested watching a story about the man. Yeah, he's got everything yet he's lonely. And there's really some really good lines in this film as well, and obviously a very strong screenplay. But it's when he first meets Susan, Charles first meets Susan, and she says, "I don't know many people," and he's like, I know too many people, so I guess we're both lonely. And I think that was a really good line, and it's really powerful, that kind of stuff. Yeah, this film knows exactly when to pull on the heartstrings. Like, he's kind of you can see why his wife leaves him, but you feel so bad for him when Susan does leave him, and that kind of thing. And yeah, you can see why it's so widely regarded as one of the greats and one of the best films ever, and some people say it is the best film ever. I can also see why it's not everyone's cup of tea. It is like very dialogue heavy, which is fair, but even from that stance, there's no denying that this film's like an absolute masterclass in storytelling, one of the greatest ever. And I think a lot of that is to do with the studio just giving Orson Welles like complete control over this film. It contributes very widely to why the film lives on 80 years later to be so successful. He came from a theatrical background, and he knew how to tell a story, and he did in the exact way he wanted to. And as I said about like 12 Angry Men, for its age, it doesn't feel old. Obviously, apart from things they can't help, like the lighting and the black and white and stuff, this film could be made today and have the exact same story and still be amazing. And even then, for a film that's 80 years old, it's an absolute masterclass in filmmaking. Some of the lighting, some of the shots, the set design, the soundtrack, everything, it still holds up now, and it's still one of the best now, 80 years later. And yeah, even like some of the comedy in parts, it's 8 years old, but it still holds up. It's great. And the makeup department, aging all of them, it looks so good. And I think when you've got a film like that, you know it's special. And it's, even if you might not like it, I love it. Even if you might not like it as much, you can still respect everything about this film like that.
I think it has the reputation of a homework movie, and like no one's watched this film in the last like 70 years without like viewing it through the prism of this is the greatest film or one of the greatest films ever made. No one's just like, oh, Citizen Kane's on Netflix, that looks good, I'm just gonna put that on and watch that. Like, everyone who watches it knows going in kind of what it's about and what its reputation is. And so it does have that like perception of being, oh yes, the greatest film of all time. I'll get through it, but I won't watch it again. I'll get through it that 1 hour. I think it's just under 2 hours. I'll just get through that. Say I've seen the so-called greatest film of all time and move on. But it is just like phenomenally entertaining, especially the first hour, and it's funny as well. And like, even though it does feel like seismic as you're watching it, like this, it feels like you're watching film history. Like every scene it just feels creative. You feel like it feels enjoyable to watch. There's no like sense of this is just a bit tedious and tough to sit through. Like, you appreciate that it's artistic, but it's not too enjoyable to actually watch it play out. It's just really entertaining. Like, it's groundbreaking in the way the story's being told, and technically it's so like revolutionary for the time, and still a lot of it still can hold up today. But even on just a basic level, I feel like you can just enjoy this film, and I never could have imagined I would have watched it. I've seen it 4 times now, and 3 times in the last like 8 months or so, because I watched it again for the second time to see. So I watched it very early on when I started getting into films, and didn't quite get it, and then watched it again 3 years later and I was like, okay, that's why it's sick. And then I watched it again before Mank, and then here now, and I could just put it on again today and it'd be perfectly fine. Like, there's no kind of doesn't drag at any point really. It's just kind of the perfect film. Mason, what was your first experience like with Citizen Kane?
Yeah, like you said, it's a weird experience because as you're watching it, you know it's arguably one of the best films of all time, or arguably like the best film of all time. And I kind of wish I didn't know that, because as you're trying to watch it, that's what's in your mind. And if you let that overtake your experience of the film, it can almost ruin it, because you're trying to look for what's the best thing about it and what is so great about it. But you just need to kind of sit back and enjoy it. You don't want to have to try and analyze every little scene, because I feel like with this film, the more you do sit back, I think you see more from relaxing and trying to watch this film instead of trying to like analyze each scene. Because like for me, as I was just enjoying taking it all in, I had a much better experience than at the beginning when I was like, why is this the best film of all time? I was like being like confrontational towards the film. I was like, why are you so good? But yeah, like I said, about 10 minutes in, once I started to like actually like relax basically and start to watch it, you can see why it is called the best film of all time. It just does everything right. And it's just insane that this film is 80 years old. Like this year, it's 80 years old. Like if you tell, it's just mad. It feels so ahead of its time. I don't think I've ever seen a film that is so ahead of its time. This film could have come out like yesterday and I'd still be like, yeah, that's elite. Like everything that it does, all the angles that it achieves and everything. I don't think just because of its age, it comes across as being so great. I think regardless of the time it was released, it would still be great, if that makes sense. Like there's just so many things. This was a film I was so interested in researching about as well. Like I was so happy to read like the Wikipedia page about it and understand the whole process that went behind it. I was watching Mank before we like recorded this now, and the whole like history and the whole like universe of this film is just so like fascinating. And I don't know why it is. Oh. I think my sister just turned off my light and yeah, Alexa, turn the light on. Yeah, I don't know why it is just so great. And well, no, sorry, that's a lie. I do know why it is so great, and because it just achieved so much for a film from 80 years ago. But it's so accessible, and that's what I think so mad about this film. For a film that is so old, it's so accessible, and there's so many people that are just anti watching black and white films and stuff like that. But I would just argue that you have to see this film. Like it's not worth having like your back up and being like, oh, black and white's boring, blah blah blah. Because just ignore that. Ignore that, and you'll see like such a great film.
I like how it reveals his whole story in that opening newsreel, and then it's kind of like challenging itself to be able to tell that story again, but in like the most compelling way, and how you're like able to do that with how it's structured, like with the reporter going around and speaking to different people to get different accounts of this person, because it's basically it's unreliable narrators who are telling this story to try and give a picture of who Charles Foster Kane was. We don't actually know. These are all just accounts from other people that witnessed him at different stages of his life. So I think that's the structure of the way it goes about that is probably the most like the interesting part, my favorite part of it, I think. And Mank kind of tries to like echo that structure in the way it does that. Because the thing with Mank, it's like it's not actually about like part of the story is about how Citizen Kane was wrote and who contributed the most to it. Was it Wells? Was it Mankiewicz? But a lot of it actually is a far broader story, which is why the controversy over that film was a bit mad from people who like arch defenders of Orson Welles, who are like, no, we're not going to bother sitting through this because it's going to assassinate his character. There's a lot more to that film, and the way it structures and tries to mirror the structure of Citizen Kane is the biggest thing I like about that. And also in that whole newsreel, just kind of like going through how like contradictory and hypocritical and like how public opinion can like change a view. Like one minute he's supporting a war, then the next time he's not supporting that war, and then he's a communist, but he's also a fascist, and everything just kind of shifts throughout one's life. If you're in the public eye, you're never going to be one thing, you're never going to not be at the heart of some kind of controversy. But I think that's kind of the best thing I like about it is the structure. But if I was going to have to pick a part of the film I'd want to spend the most time in, it would be the newspaper section of the film when he first gets in there as a young guy, when he's obviously Orson Welles is like 25 when he's making this, and that's like one of the few times he's actually acting his age, and everything with that newspaper, that whole energy of those scenes, like the first day when he comes to the paper and he's talking to Mr. Carter, the befuddled Mr. Carter, who just has nowhere where to look. He's like, how do you do? How do you do? He can't he can't hack what's going on. He's completely befuddled by what's going on and how his life's been uprooted, and all of a sudden they're a 24-hour newspaper, and they're changing the way they do the news with yellow journalism, all that kind of stuff. And like the transition from the photo frame when he recruits all those like famous newspaper men from another paper, the transition to them actually being with him, and that whole party that comes after that, that whole energy was just so fun and so mad. Just something you just wouldn't have expected to be in the quote unquote greatest film of all time. May, this is your first time watching it as well. Is there a particular part of the film, if you had to get more time with a certain section of this film? Obviously it covers so many parts of this man's life. If you had to spend just one, you had to contribute the most time to one section of his life, where would it be?
I would probably put more emphasis on his childhood, because I think the significance of that was kind of lost because there was just hardly any time spent on it. And you kind of didn't really understand. Well, I didn't understand the kind of like the significance of his childhood and how that would have affected him for the remainder of his life, and how that kind of So that's something that kind of like it kind of jumped straight in for me. And what Mason was saying about this having the title of being one of the very best films, or one of the most like pioneering films of its time, and still being kind of something that's looked back at and studied and drawn upon. I went into it with that in my mind, and also, I don't know, I had a misconception of what the film was going to be about. I really had no idea. For some reason, I thought it was going to be about a prisoner. For some reason, which is quite weird. So it kind of messed me up a bit when I was watching it. And for maybe the first like 20, 30, maybe 40 minutes, I just was kind of like nonplussed by it. And I found like the newspaper bit was just a bit too heavy and drawn on, and like kind of like built upon and in your face. And I don't know, these kind of, I just didn't enjoy it that much. I kind of felt a bit disconnected from the character because I didn't really see him acting. I only saw what people were saying about him, if that made any sense. I get it built up like kind of the legend of who the man was before you actually met him. And then when the scenes did start with him in them, and especially when he was younger, and then his like the way he navigated his way through the challenges that he faced, then I started to enjoy it a bit more. And then it came to the divorces and things like that, and then the real strains. I found myself already being invested in the character without realizing it. So it did that quite well. It kind of snuck up on me. But what I would say is kind of like some of the scenes in these older films are almost a very kind of like slapsticky, but in terms of conversation, like when he first moves into the newspaper and that old dude is like kind of like trying to interrupt him and kind of shout at him, and he's just talking over it, and everyone's like talking back, and everyone's like having a really good time, but like, and he's getting really annoyed. It just feels like overtly just too energized for me. Like it's a bit incoherent, which is fine, I guess, because it's only that scene that really like annoyed me. The rest of it was absolutely fine. But then, yes, not knowing, I didn't know this film was over 80 years old. That's actually quite mad, considering it's like you would hold it up to par with the other films, even from now. So in that respect, I can't rate it down because of that. I just kind of felt a lack, just in the first 40 minutes to an hour, like kind of a lack of investment in the film. And it kind of changed towards the end, but I don't think it fulfilled the expectations I had of it. I wish I just watched it not knowing it was a good film, and then I probably would have really liked it. And then also, I don't know, I'm pretty stupid, so I kind of missed the relevance, like the whole Rosebud thing, and then had to kind of like Google it afterwards. And then I kind of understood again. So that's another thing. That's just me being too stupid, and probably just not watching the film properly. So the only things I have wrong with the film are maybe one or two minor details, and then me being an idiot.
Rosebud doesn't really matter. Like that's just kind of like a MacGuffin, really. That's kind of, I feel like Wells was like conscious of that at the time as well. Like everyone, he'll like drive the whole conversation towards what does Rosebud mean, when really it didn't really matter to this. Like you can't define a man's whole life by one word that he says when he dies. I think that was kind of the point, and I thought that's like an interesting thing to put in there, to have everyone focus on what that means. And so the people around the movie are trying to focus, like people watching the film are trying to focus on what that means, and then also within the film they're trying to focus on what Rosebud means to try to reveal the like myth behind Charles Foster Kane. So I think that's where Rosebud comes down for me, and I thought that's like an interesting kind of way to go about it. The part I least like about the film, which is like from a story perspective, it's like fine, is the whole everything with Susan Alexander, and she's just bare annoying. Like that's kind of like the point. But I feel like her acting is like pretty bad. The way she's shrieking, like especially when his friend Leland produces the bad review in the Inquirer, and she's like bleating on about that. It's like, it's in your own paper. Like it's like it's meant to be the point, but she's just bare annoying. And that whole part of him building the opera house and kind of like projecting like his need to be liked, like he just wants to be loved by everyone in spite of everything else, and he's like projecting that onto her through her like singing career. It's like he'll feel a sense of like fulfillment if her singing career lives up to what he wants it to. So yeah, from a story perspective that works, because like the first hour is very lively and on the up, so it makes sense. Now he's kind of in a bit of a funk, and this is his like downfall going towards when he eventually passes. So yeah, that's probably my least favorite part of the film. But I think Orson Welles, I kind of want to see more of him as an actor after this film. I've only seen 3 films with him in it, but I feel like he's one of the, like, in terms of like an on-screen presence, I feel like he's one of maybe like 10 people in history who are like instantly you feel like this is like a proper actor / movie star. Like there's instant charisma, everything about him, even when he's having to do it behind a load of makeup, like Ross said as well, like the makeup's a bit mad for the 1940s, the way they're able to seamlessly transition him through ages, considering he's 25. So yeah, that's a bit mad. But as well as like just the way he carries himself is just it's just got so much personality and that like booming voice. I don't know if you knew about his like War of the Worlds radio thing that he did, where like he like War of the Worlds, the H.G. Wells like novel, he did a reading of that on the radio, and because his voice was like so commanding and like evocative, people thought there was actually like that book's about an alien invasion, or the Tom Cruise film, or the other film. But yeah, like people thought there was actually an alien invasion going down because of him on the radio reading this book. So obviously people back then, you didn't have the internet to check what was going on or anything else like that. So people just like tune into the radio and hear his like booming voice describing this alien invasion, and they thought it was real. And I feel that kind of epitomizes the strength of him as a performer, as a dramatist, all that kind of stuff. Ross, was that something that was striking for you, like the kind of power in Orson Welles' performances, on top of everything that he does as a director, which kind of revolutionized the way you make films?
Yeah, so it's quite, I think you look at kind of great performances of that time, and that is certainly one of them. And I haven't seen any other Orson Welles even like directed or acted things, but I want to, just from watching this, because it's so impressive and it is so powerful. And I think obviously he's directed it and cast himself as Kane, but works. And he obviously knew he could do that, and yeah, he knew he could do that, and he did it so well. And and there was no one else I think that could have carried that like that. It is such a kind of dominating performance, and like carrying the film in a sense, because as you say, his wife's performance is a bit iffy. No one else in particular really stands out, but the fact that this kind of in this great film is also a great performance, it helps so much. And he's the reason you want to kind of carry on watching and get so interested, because he brings the emotion, he brings the comedy, he wrote the film, so he knows exactly what he wants from that role. And I think that's where that comes from. And I think that's why it works so well.
Did he write the film? That's the controversy.
Well, directed, wrote, whatever. Yeah.
No, he probably did. I think there was one guy, so obviously like the whole debate about who wrote it is like obviously that's in Menk, and that's been like one of the biggest like debates in like film history. But there's like one guy, I can't remember who he is. I think maybe he's just like a critic or like an essayist, but like he kind of summed up in one essay kind of how they both him and Mank both contributed to the script in different way. He kind of like he put it out there in like a coherent way. It's like, yeah, these parts he kind of inspired that, and then he inspired this, and they worked together to produce this iconic script, which is like the most like rational way to do it, rather than like the hot debates that have happened over the last 4 years. Like, no, it was all Mank, or no, Wells did all the work. So yeah, watch Mank. I also like the lighting in this film as well. I don't know what it is about just the black and white colors. There's something really works for me with regard to that in this film, particularly that scene with the reporter in the, I can't remember whose like diary or whatever he's reading. I can't remember which character he was reading, but like he's in like that massive room, and he's got like a certain amount of time with the book, and the light's like directly shining onto the book. So it's like the contrasts in those scenes just kind of I found really enjoyable to look at. And then yeah, also like the shot of Kane when he's watching Susan's performance, and like you have that bit which has become a gif now of him like standing up and clapping. It's like one of the most like, I feel like that's one of the first gifs. But even just the kind of lighting in that with the like, going over his face as he's sat in there, as he sat there, kind of you're not really sure what he's thinking about. He just knows he's put all of his energy into this performance, and deep down he probably knows she's a bit shit, but he can't bring himself to admit that, so he has to kind of fight it. So yeah, for the lighting throughout this film was something that really worked for me. Okay, let's get some ratings for Citizen Kane. Start with Ross.
I will go with a big 9.
Mason.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm gonna go for a 9.
May.
Considering when it was made, is this what I think, yeah, or what I should think? You can't nod. That's not a yes or no question.
Be honest, mate. Just if you feel like saying something, say it.
Okay, I'll give it an 8.3. So I can understand why people revere it quite highly. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say.
I'll give it a 9.3. Okay. So, oh yeah, I didn't even say that we've now that's the 101st film. What was it? It was 12 Angry Men was the 100th film, was it? What?
That's overall it's 100 now. Those 3 was 98, 900.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we're doing 100% Rotten Tomatoes. Did you even say that? Yeah. Ross's ratings round up.
So we have 2 new top 10 films, but first, last but not least, this week, last but not least, with an 8.6, we have The Terminator. In second, with an 8.9, we have Citizen Kane, and first with a 9.0 is 12 Angry Men. In terms of the overall rankings, that puts The Terminator at 12th, between 7 and The Martian, and that is the 2 films that have been knocked out the top 10 this week. Citizen Kane at 4th, joint 4th with The Wolf of Wall Street, and we have a new number 1 with 12 Angry Men, our number 1 film ever that we've done. Yeah, so out of 100, it's first. There's no need to do the top 100 films because none of them are anywhere near it.
Okay. Now we are doing Actor of the Week. Matty.
I would like to go for Orson Welles. Is that right? He's a dude, isn't he? Yeah, sick. Cool. Don't look silly there. I feel like at every stage of him acting in that film, at every stage of his life, he kind of represented himself perfectly. Just had like a full understanding of the character. as he's transitioning through these key stages. And I feel like I don't know, the performances across 12 Angry Men were too spread out and there was no standout ones. And as you said, he stood out perfectly in this film. And you can see why he's like that. That character is just extremely successful and just powerful and kind of decisive and yet also flawed to a sense. Yeah, so that's why I've chosen him.
Mason.
It goes against what Matty just said, but I've gone for someone from 12 Angry Men. I went for Juror number 3, Lee J. Cobb. He's a good gammon, basically. But besides that, I think having these like isolated, watching these isolated acting like experiences is so strong. And in a room of 12 people, he stands out the most to me as the most like still like he steals the show with his acting, basically. And I think that's probably only because he's the one that's allowed to show so much emotion in his role. But even still, in that film, he stands out for like the right reasons, I think. So yeah.
Ross.
I think this week was a complete it's a throw up. I think between Orson Welles, Lee J. Cobb, and maybe Henry Fonda, but I think Lee J. Cobb tipped it for me. I mean, Orson Welles is obviously amazing, Citizen Kane, but I think that like monologue at the end from Lee J. Cobb just before he says not guilty, I think tipped it for me. And in that like 5-minute monologue alone, there's so much emotion there and you really feel it. And yeah, that's what tipped it for me to go for Lee J. Cobb.
Yeah, it's close for me between Orson Welles and Arnold Schwarzenegger, but yeah, Welles just pipped it. Schwarzenegger's very good as in that scene where he has to take his eyeball out, but yeah, I think Welles just pipped him. Okay, since we've been talking about probably the greatest movie of all time, or perceived to be that way, I think the most recent, was it one of the like significant like film in America, film like magazines or something, it was like they're like the main one, like they voted, because Vertigo used to be number 1. I don't like Vertigo as much as I used to, but Vertigo used to be number 3. I think Citizen Kane's gone back to number 1. Or maybe it might be the other way around. I think Citizen Kane was number 1 and Vertigo's gone back to number 1. Something like that. With that in mind, what is the best bad movie of all time? A movie that is good, but it's only good based on how bad it is. The enjoyment you get from it is derived from all that bad goodness shit that goes into this film. Ross.
So the film I picked has a big 4 out of 10 on IMDb and a big 9% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I went with The Cat in the Hat. You know, when I was a kid, I loved that film, and I think it's hilarious still. Like, I still quote it to this day, and I think it's funny. It's shit, yeah. It's just kind of a mess, but it's just hilarious, and yeah, I think it's funny, and I still quote it now, which means it must be good and funny.
It's when he cuts his tail off and he doesn't realize. They're like, oh, you cut your tail off. Oh, I see. Son of a bitch. Yeah, that film's iconic. My watch that right now. Mason.
Mine's got a 1.9 on IMDb and a 15 Metascore. So it's one of the elites, basically. I went for Disaster Movie. It's so bad. Like it's obviously clearly so bad. But for some reason, I had this on DVD when I was younger. And I've watched it quite a few times, and I still kind of find it funny. And I feel like I said, I could probably put this on now. No, full well it's going to be one of the worst films I've seen in my life, but still laugh and still just enjoy it. Like I said, I enjoy it because of how bad it is, and this film is bad, but it's good.
Matty?
I would probably have to pick The Girl Next Door, because I put it on knowing it should be just a shit film, but it would pass the time. And I damn near cried at it. It was brilliant. It's just perfect film, but only if you expect it to be terrible. Yeah, that's probably and I always described it as the best bad film, or the best shit film that I've ever seen. It just fits that title perfectly.
I watched Con Air on Wednesday, and that's just like, there's so many like ingredients to that, because they're deliberately trying to make it bad. That's the point. It's meant to be completely absurd, just some terrible acting in there, but it's a prison break film on an aeroplane. Like that there, you've got your film already. You've got that premise. You've got the film, and Nick Cage is the star. And Nick Cage is kind of the king of this genre. Like for Nick Cage, he's like I think the key to having like a good bad movie is that the like main actor is actually a really good actor, a dramatically trained, highly skilled actor like Nick Cage, who won an Oscar. And then after he wins the Oscar, he does films like Con Air and Face Off, which are just completely absurd, but so much fun. And I think that style of film and Nick Cage as a performer just kind of sums up the good bad movie genre. Yes, yeah, that's on it's now on Disney Plus. That's an elite film. I highly recommend. The Irish's was a Pop Vinyl Award. Ross.
I think I would go with just Citizen Kane one, just Kane at any point in his life. I think it'd just be cool to have that. I don't know. I would enjoy that. And yeah, I think they've like being a company that makes like movie memorabilia. They've got to kind of whatever the word is, commemorate it in some kind of commemorate in some kind of way. So yeah, just any Citizen Kane one.
I'll do it when he's delivering his speech when he's trying to become senator, just for his affair is about to get exposed. Like iconic image of him with the massive like poster behind him with his face. So you have that in the pop vinyl. You have him, and then you have like the poster in like the background little thing that they sometimes have. Yeah, that's another elite. That's another elite part of the film. The transition from the political rally to going back to the apartment where Susan Alexander is and his wife's there, and then his political rally. That's the other good sick thing about the film is like, yeah, he's a bit like he kind of gets corrupted. Like he starts out being like trying to be the man of the people and do things right. Then he gets corrupted. Like that quote, like absolute power corrupts absolutely, whatever. But the thing is, the people he's competing against are just as shady, if not even worse. Like the guy who tries to screw him over because of the affair. So that's another good thing about that film. Elite film. Okay, that is it. So at Corona Cinema on Instagram, Corona Cinema podcast.wordpress.com, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Podbean. Next week, is it Disney? Is it Disney? So it's the Golden Age era. So we're going to do every era of Walt Disney animation, doing an episode every 6 months. And the first one is the Golden Age, which was like the 39 up until World War II, I think, something like that. And we're doing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Pinocchio, and Bambi. Yeah. So that should be good. Until then, go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I also thought they should change the name of 12 Angry Men, because 12 Angry Men, they're not actually all angry. So maybe
7 Angry Men.
Yeah, say a few angry men, some more unreasonable men, a few quite reasonable men, and a few quite calm men as well. Maybe they should change the title to that.
12 men.
12.
12.
12.
Sausage fest.
The Magnificent 12.